sex. Pretty much everyone's familiar with it, but simultaneously uncomfortable with it. And it's one of those things that happens to everyone, or at least nearly everyone, but it's taboo to talk about. And quite honestly, the stigmas associated with sex are some of the things that are plaguing our society to this day. And I will return to that thought, but first, I think we need to do something important, which is define the word sex, because I want to make sure that we're all on the same page when we're talking about it. So when you say the word sex, you're kind of just throwing a vague outline into the air and hoping people know what exactly you mean by it, because it's a very subjective definition. In my own definition, sex is the umbrella term for anything regarding intercourse. That includes foreplay, oral, penetrational, whether that be with the use of aids or not, and everything in between. And there is a lot in between. Now, as promised, I will be returning to my plague comment from earlier. But rather than explain exactly what I meant by it, I'm going to give an example. When I entered the world of sexuality, I was met with little to no useful information, as many of us are. And I found myself buying into taboos and shying away from a completely normal act. And I also had friends that were becoming sexually active, but I never wanted to share with them my experiences. So it was only months after the fact that I was able to compare those experiences to those of my peers. In those months, I thought that pain and discomfort regularly was completely normal and natural. And my sole purpose was to offer my partner the best experience he could have. The problem is that I shouldn't have had to learn that what I was feeling wasn't normal from my peers, because an understanding of sexual nature should have been instilled within me and within all of us throughout our adolescence. In fact, it should have been made clear a very long time ago, because our first introduction to sexuality naturally occurs before the age of 5. While preparing for my TED Talk, I had to read a mentor text, and I chose a quite large textbook called Sexuality in Adolescence and Emerging Adulthood by Dr. Raymond Montemayor. And Dr. Montemayor defined this period before the age of 5 as child sex play. And it can be characterized by a number of things, such as touching of the genitalia, an obsession with sexual vocabulary, such as penis, vagina, breasts, so on and so forth, and or just a general curiosity surrounding the subject. Unfortunately, though, in an interview I actually held with Dr. Montemayor a few weeks after reading about this, I learned that most parents don't meet this development with positivity and actually prohibit this behavior. This is around the time when reverse psychology begins to take hold, and the stigmatization around sex becomes prevalent to a child for the first time. The more parents ask their children to refrain from using certain words, the more their children are going to use those words to gain negative attention and to gauge negative reactions from their peers. They begin to associate sex with negativity, and when they get older and they finally gain a sense of humility, they'll be afraid to talk about it. For example, when I was 5 years old, I loved the word penis. I'm serious, I was incredibly intrigued by the concept of a penis, because when you're 5, everyone looks the same, right? We're all like small and we aren't developed at all, except for one key difference, which is what's below our pants. But I was discouraged from asking questions about sexuality, about penises, about pretty much any reproductive organ, at least to my peers, which they were the only people I wanted answers from. I didn't really want to ask my parents about it. And my frustration towards this ended up manifesting in the form of a very extensive and aggressive sexual vocabulary that I would use daily against my peers, my family, my authoritative figures such as teachers. And I very quickly became that weird kid that talked about sex too much. That or the most sexually frustrated / repressed kindergartner in the world, which I don't think I was. But luckily enough, 4th or 5th grade rolls around pretty soon and sex surrounds me, so I'm no longer the weird one out. And Boys are beginning to talk about breasts on the bus. Girls are questioning the many wonders of male anatomy, like why they have those dangly bits that we don't for some reason. And this is around the time when your school nurse takes all of the girls into one room to explain menstruation, and then your PE teacher explains nothing about menstruation to the boys, leading to some very interesting questions in the future. And, you know, probably around this time there are rumors circulating around the school about sex ed, which is going to be coming up in a year or two. But before that happens, something very important needs to occur at home first. The talk, which, yeah, heard all those noises. It's always a bit rough, and it almost always ruins your childhood, and those magical storks that somehow defy all the laws of reproduction and biology. And in my interview with Dr. Montemayor, we brainstormed several key changes that can be made in the way that parents approach teaching their children about sex. 1, no aphorisms. Just get rid of them, because when your kid is still calling vaginas flowers at age 12, you're going to regret it. I mean, and I knew kids that did that. So by using the correct terminology when explaining reproductive organs, you're desensitizing your child to these words. You're normalizing them and inadvertently discouraging them from saying them without all the negative stigmatization that usually comes along with that. 2, build a strong relationship with your kid. This seems pretty obvious, I'd assume, and this usually starts at a very young age, but it's super important to have a strong relationship with your child because it makes the talk 100 times easier if you're already able to comfortably converse with them. 3, you know your child better than any sex ed curriculum ever will, so personalize it. You know what they're capable of hearing and what they're capable of handling, and you know what they're not. Don't get caught up in all the irrelevant stuff, just teach them what they need to know. 4, normalize sex while still teaching about safety. So don't encourage your kids to just go off and have sex the second you tell them what it is, but normalize it. Don't make it seem like this terrifying thing that's going to happen eventually and no one can avoid. It's not the end of the world. And 5, don't worry because you're only half of the equation. The other half, unfortunately, is sex ed, which has a whole lot of issues of its own. It's one of the few courses that you're taught in school with the sole purpose of it aiding you only outside of school. And here are the problems with it. Sex ed is rarely assessed or designed by experts. And the main push for it in this country is just so that counties can say that they offer it. It has a habit of just casually skipping over the LGBTQ community too, which is, you know, a lot of people. And young boys are especially victimized by this because sex between men opens up a plethora of STD possibilities. And then there's the whole abstinence thing that sex ed courses are obsessed with. Abstinence is completely unrealistic. And while it's okay to teach a middle schooler to stay abstinent, once they go to high school or once they get married, whenever they end up becoming sexually active, how are we supposed to know what we do afterwards? Because we're really not taught in depth about that. And then, you know, we all have to learn how to put a condom on a banana or a wooden, what is it, like a cylinder? That's what I was taught, at least. But we don't learn about the pill or the implant or the ring or any other form of contraception, because sometimes condoms don't work for some people, sometimes the implant doesn't work for some people, sometimes the pill doesn't work for some people. It's all subjective. Now, sex ed began in the 1920s, and you can all imagine how that went down. But the thing is, in the 1920s, people were meeting their spouses in high school. A lot of people only had one sexual partner, and contraception really wasn't a thing. You know, you get pregnant, you deal with it, you have the baby. But now we live in a sexualized culture, and sex is everywhere. Sex ed curriculums are not allowed to be underdeveloped anymore. And the problem is that without a proper sexual education, people will end up going to untrustworthy sources like pornography, which in moderation isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's certainly not a substitute for a proper sexual education. So in order to avoid these issues, here is my proposal. 1, sex ed courses would be for 3 years. And the reason I say this is because it gives the curriculum and the ability to mature with the students, which is really important because something that's palatable in 8th grade might not be palatable in 6th grade. 2, sex ed courses will be taught and designed by experts, and experts only. No more PE teachers. You were great at parachute, even better at dodgeball, but you are not qualified to teach me about sex. 3, never separate class by gender. It just breeds gender stigmas and sexual knowledge imbalances. Everyone needs to know the same thing, whether that be menstruation or penetrational sex or literally anything. Everyone should have the same amount of sexual information. 4, everyone included. Regardless of sexual orientation, your questions will be answered and you will be taught how to stay safe. And 5, be realistic. Most of the kids I took sex ed with, including myself, lost their virginity or became sexually active, whatever you want to refer to it as, in freshman or sophomore year. So don't teach us a course as if it's going to apply to us when we're only adults, when in reality it's going to apply to us a lot sooner than that. And one last reminder for everyone to take home. Sex is normal. Talk about it, think about it, question it, embrace it, whether you're having it or not. Let's take the fear out of the word and treat it as it is. Sex.